I absolutely adore Spider-Man No Way Home. I'll never forget sitting down in that theater for the first time after a year and a half of rumored cameos and plot details. It's easily my favorite Spider-Man movie, and it's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. I may or may not have even shed a tear or two when I saw the movie 5 times in theaters. However, I think it would be unrealistic of me to say that this movie is perfect, because while it's so close in my opinion, there's just a few things that I think could have been done better. There's countless videos on YouTube that explain why this movie is so phenomenal, and I don't even really think those are that necessary because the movie just kind of explains itself. But I wanted to do something different while still talking about this movie, so I'm going to talk about the things that in my opinion held this movie back from being perfect. So let's start with the CGI. I don't want to discredit the amazing work done by the visual effects team by any means. I think Doc Ock's arms are actually insanely impressive and look amazing. I truly can't believe how good the de-aging looks on the villains, and there's so many other really impressive uses of visual effects in this movie. However, there's some moments in this movie where the visual effects just look a little wonky and it kind of takes me out of the moment. One of those shots being the way Andrew Garfield lands after he catches MJ. I'll be honest, I'm not sure what it is, it's just the way that he lands and I guess the way her legs kind of like bounce up and down just looks really cartoony to me. The other one that I've seen people talk about is this infamous shot of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. I do think by far the most unfortunate example is going to be when Andrew Garfield actually comes into the movie. It's supposed to be like this emotional moment because we haven't seen Garfield as Spider-Man for 8 years. But again, this just looks super wonky and I think that everybody kind of agrees. It isn't necessarily the CGI model of Andrew's Spider-Man, I think that actually looks really good. It's just the animation, the way the model moves, it doesn't really look real. The visual effects team actually altered it a little bit after the movie already came out, but it doesn't really look like they changed the animation that much, so it just still looks a little wonky to me. And again, this is supposed to be a really important and emotional scene, but every time I watch it, I just know it's not Andrew Garfield. This leads me to my other point within the visual effects category, which is that sometimes it's just overused in this movie. I really don't see a reason why they couldn't have had Andrew just jump through the portal the same way Tobey did. They actually did film it that way, they just covered Andrew Garfield with the CG model, which makes no sense to me. When Tobey Maguire is wearing his mask in the final battle, there's only like 1 or 2 shots where the mask is actually real and not CGI'd onto his head, and it's really noticeable to me. This shot's probably the best example of this. I know they made at least 2 costumes for Tobey in this movie. One that has a mask not attached to the rest of the costume and one that does. So with this in mind, I don't really see why they had to use a CGI model for Tobey when he had his mask on like 95% of the time. They, for whatever reason, didn't do this with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. They used his like actual suit a lot of the time and it looks real because it is. The second I saw this shot of the Green Goblin in the trailer, I instantly knew it was a CGI model. And again, I'm just not sure why they couldn't film such a simple shot like this practically. They had the costume for Willem Dafoe and I saw some pretty crazy behind the scenes footage of him on a practical glider doing all these stunts, and these didn't even make it into the movie. So surely they can film a real shot of him just sitting on the glider like this. Again, for the most part, the CGI in this film is great, but when it isn't great, it's really noticeable. The next thing I want to talk about I know has been super controversial, and that's going to be Tobey Maguire's mask in this movie. Yes, I am one of those people that agrees that Tobey's mask in this movie just does not look good. From what I've seen, people are kind of split on this. Like I've seen some people that like don't care or don't notice the difference, but there's also people like me that just really noticed it. I don't want to seem like I'm not grateful because I am eternally grateful that Tobey is even in this movie, and I would easily take what we got with this movie as opposed to not seeing Tobey return. However, just like the CGI, sometimes this really took me out of the moment. Andrew Garfield wore the exact same Spider-Man costume that he used in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but for Tobey's costume, it's been so long that they had to remake some suits for this movie. And the main issue with this mask is the web pattern on it. There's like this extra line of webbing around the nose that just really makes it look different from when we last saw Tobey. A lot of people are using the argument that Tobey's Peter just changed the look of the mask after a while, but I just can't buy into that knowing that the costume designers tried to make the mask look the same but couldn't. The costume designers are working on $1 million movie and the mask doesn't look like it used to, which is just a little bit frustrating to me. They could have just reached out to this guy on Instagram named Elfet who makes better looking masks for $900 a pop, and it likely would have been cheaper for them too. There's some shots where it's not too noticeable, like some of the ones I'm going to throw on the screen now, but it is something that I will never not notice when I watch this movie, being such a big Tobey Maguire fan. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is the villains in this movie. I absolutely love the Green Goblin and Doc Ock in this movie. I wouldn't change anything about them. I think Electro is actually super funny and a way better version of himself compared to the Amazing Spider-Man 2 version. My issues with the villains really just lie with Sandman and the Lizard. I'm aware that they weren't the main villains and that was never the intention, but going into this movie I was pretty excited to see them return. It's not too big of a deal for me, but the Lizard in this movie just looks like a different Lizard than the Amazing Spider-Man 1 Lizard. Unlike Electro, there's not really an explanation for the reason that he looks different, and it just kind of messes with the feeling of continuity for me. The main issue with these two though is that it's just very apparent that no actors ever came to set to play them. Granted, I understand that could be because of COVID or other reasons, but I would have rather waited to see this movie if we got to see the actors more. And of these two characters, I guess I would say it's just kind of awkward to see Sandman the way he is, because in Spider-Man 3, he was never really like this sand silhouette person like he was in No Way Home. It's just not something that makes a lot of sense like in this universe, but it's really just an effect of things that happen in real life. Again, I think for the purpose of this movie, it's better to see more of the Lizard than it is to see of Dr. Connors, but I still would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the actor as opposed to using recycled footage from The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Alright, and the last gripe I have with this movie is probably the most insignificant one, but it's going to be the dialogue at some points. There's just points in this movie where I feel like the characters were saying things in this MCU movie that they wouldn't say in their own movies/universes. For example, if Sam Raimi was making this movie and he had the same writing staff as his trilogy, I don't think we would ever hear Norman Osborn say,
"I could go for a burrito."
And the same thing goes for Mark Webb and his writing staff. I don't feel like we would ever really hear Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man say,
"Is that a band? Are you in a band?"
It just seems so naive of his character. And I'm not saying that this is bad dialogue by any means. Was it funny? Absolutely. I laughed every time that he said that. It just kind of took me out of the moment again because it's like these instances of dialogue for these characters could only happen in No Way Home, and it would never happen in their own universe. And again, for the 100th time, I want to reiterate, I'm not hating on this movie by any means. I love it so much, and I think it has some great rewatch value. But these are some of the issues I think could have been avoided, and I think could have made the movie better had they not been there. I think this was probably the perfect and only way to bring these villains back, so I don't know that we'll see them again. I think it is a little more likely that we'll see Toby and Andrew return again at some point. But let me know if there's some things about this movie that you would change that I didn't mention, or if you disagree with some of the things that I mentioned. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.